Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are again with our regular spot covering that well-known book now, Turbulence, by the author and aviation veteran, David Banmiller. Dave, lovely to have you again, my friend. I look forward to these little sessions quite a bit. And in fact, I miss you now during the week. So it's lovely to have you back on. Where are you speaking to us from now? You're still out in the States in sunny...
I'm in Palm Springs at the moment. I was in the Bay Area earlier in the week on another project, and then back here, and on with you. And I'm probably going to stay here a while. I've gotten a little bit of traction on my book in the Hollywood crowd that makes movies, and who knows what's going to happen. But as you guys suggested, this story is made for prime time. So I'm spending a little bit of time on that project as well.
Good man, good man, good man. And both, well, me and Salem are ready to do a little walk on. So whatever happens, we're willing to play any part. But so this week, this is the 12th session we've had. We've now entered into part 3 of the book, and we're on chapter 10. So the part 3 is all about business. And this particular chapter is entitled Managing 747 Sized Egos. And my God, there's been enough of them in our industry, and far too often, so many of them, they've only got a Cessna size warehouse or hangar to park in, and they think they're way more important and way above what they're capable of doing. So going to be very interested to see now which parts we cover here. But it's a terrible thing as well.
Let me make
big an ego.
Let me make a comment. When you talked about the hangar, we have a saying in Texas: all hat, no cattle.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah. There's plenty of them. Yeah. But it is a terrible thing, isn't it, in our industry? Well, not just in our industry. I suppose it's in every industry. It's wherever business and success and reward and everything is part and parcel of everyday life. But the ego side can absolutely crucify a business or a department or a person. It's a terrible thing, huh?
Well, the stories, I'll mention the Frank Borman story when he was a Navy guy, and he was a very strong personality. And then when he became head of Eastern, he thought he was in the military. And Charlie Bryan, I think was the guy's name, who ran the mechanics union, said, actually, no, you're not. Just a little bit more democratic than you think. And by the way, we're a union that has rights. Those two guys at loggerheads, more than anything else, helped destroy Eastern. And that's an example. But if you go back to how we got there, let's pretend it's the 20s and 30s, right? Airplanes were flying airmail and they were crashing every other day, and they had no radar, and they'd be flying by the railroad tracks and so on. So what kind of person got into that? Okay. In terms of the style of a person, you had to be strong-willed, confident, comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Now you go into the 40s and the evolution within the industry. Of course, you have World War II and the military, and now all of a sudden things change. And let me put as a backdrop, I've seen guys running airlines that were finance guys, operations guys, and marketing guys.
Yep.
They're like the big three. Okay. And in today's world, you see something different. And I'll do that at the end of this comment. So then in the 50s and 60s, you had TWA and Pan Am. Jockey, I mean, it was vicious between the two, and it was personal.
Yep.
One Trip, I think, was one. And of course, TWA was owned by Howard Hughes. And so these guys wanted to own rights, and this was when you could lobby Washington and the president and you get your roots. So all this stuff went on, right? You had to be a guy with a big size level of confidence and ego. And I suggest, and I'm rambling a bit, but I want to make a point, that there's a difference between having a big ego and being confident and strong in what you believe in.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Huge difference. Guys that have big egos that think, I'm just the best thing, as opposed to somebody that is confident in their beliefs, feels good about who they are and what they represent, is honest and straightforward, may come across as either slightly arrogant or egotistical, but in fact, they're just comfortable as long as they respect the other people in the process and don't think they're pawns in his game. So now when I was at TWA, I was in corporate headquarters in the 60s. When I started, I was like 25. What did I know? And I'm up in the executive suite. I mean, believe it or not. And the guys that were running it at the time Blaine Cook was the executive VP, and he had everything, including stations, marketing, and so on. And he was an academic. And then there was a strong-willed guy, Tom Huntington, that ran operations. I worked for him. He ran stations and operations around the world. And then Wally Smith was the marketing guy. Great guy, really, really cool, smart marketing. These two guys, again, Blaine was on top of them. And I kept saying, I wonder what's going to happen. It's like I'm in the middle and I'm 25. What do I know about anything? I'm just watching the parade, you know?
Yeah.
So then Tom, I think, got fired. And then Wally Smith became the guy. And then Blaine Cook wrote a thesis, again, an academic, late 60s, early, or maybe mid 70s, while he was still executive VP, about why marketing should run the airline. And then when he changed horses, a year later, he wrote another thesis, why operations should run the airline. And I would suggest this, it's the people, not your pedigree, that is most important. General Lyon taught me something I've never forgotten. He said, Dave, boxes before faces. So when you set up an organization, make sure the organizational structure is sound. Don't set up an organization based upon egos, personalities, friendships, board member, friends, all that. Set up the structure and then find the people for this job, and this job. Yeah, today's totally different. When you look at today, Doug Parker's running the biggest airline in the world. Doug was a finance guy. And if you look at, I think the JetBlue, Continental, United guys are more on the operating side. Gordon Bethune, when he ran Continental and saved the company, Gordon was an ops guy. He was a pilot, but he was really a strong ops maintenance person. And he did a great job. I think some of it might be timing in the industry. Do you need the marketing guys? Do you need the ops guys? Herb Kelleher was a lawyer. And he developed Southwest. And Herb wasn't an ops guy, but he knew people. And he put the right people in the right jobs, and his charismatic behavior and attitude was what made Southwest what it is today.
No, and everybody talks about it, and it's correct me if I'm wrong, it's one of the only or one of the few that has always made a profit.
Yeah, I think maybe except for COVID, that's factually true. You know, they started just in Texas between Houston, Austin, and Dallas. And every airplane came home at night to Dallas. So all the crews were there, all the spare parts, all the spare engines, same equipment type. And Herb put it out on a cocktail napkin with a couple of other partners. And that was the route. That's how they started.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Now, like in the book, you mentioned, you know, lots of people, you know, who were pioneers, who were leaders, who were, you know, the people that everybody looked up to at the time. But it also made me think, if you look at the timing or the cycle of being any senior manager, a lot depends on what's going on in the industry at the time, because you're either managing through a legacy or through a survival period. Then there's a period where somebody has to come in who rebuilds, somebody who then comes in and stabilizes, somebody who then comes in and is more on the selling and the marketing and the promoting and PR side. Then you get someone who comes in with more of a political viewpoint, and then you get a positive disruptor when something else happens, and then it all goes round again. So in COVID, if you were unlucky to be in a different phase, you could be displaced, or somebody else could be more beneficial than you just because of the phase that you're in. And it's quite ironic the way that goes. You know, the cycles of the industry, the cycles of the company, the cycles of the culture, but it does change, and it does affect the speed of that change. And coming back to egos again, if you've got the wrong type of person in there at the wrong time, it can overrun into several of those cycles, which holds the company back for too long, and very good people leave the company as a result.
I'll give you two interesting observations. The first one is I read an article years ago about a guy that's hired by the board to be chairman and CEO, and he has to fix the company. It's in trouble. So he comes up with an idea. He said, okay, the first year, I'm just finding out what's going on. Then the second year, I'm going to develop a business plan and vet it and so on. And the third year, I'll execute the plan, and it'll take a year for the plan to work. I'm good for 4 years no matter what. That was the story. It's not quite that way in the airline business. The other comment was Southwest. Herb Kelleher was bigger than life. Just an outstanding human being. And I was fortunate enough to know him quite well. He was replaced by Gary Kelly, a finance guy.
Yep.
But Gary had a great personality to this day. Of course, he's still running Southwest. And he's a decent human being. You know, that's just the character of who they hire at Southwest. And he knows his numbers. He comes across well on TV all the time. He knows exactly what he's saying. He's confident, not arrogant. He's comfortable in his own skin, and he's smart. And he made the transition from Herb to him seamless.
Yep.
But it was hard replacing somebody like the charismatic Herb Kelleher.
Yeah. But it also shows there would have been a lot more groundwork behind just one leaving and one coming in, or one.
Oh, there was. Oh, yeah. Herb was.
That also marks the culture of the company, which is why it transcends through all of those cycles, which is a really, really positive thing. Now, if you look at, say, the old school, so the people that you've mentioned Crandall, Tilton, Lorenzo, Kelleher, Bethune, you've mentioned all of those. Now, if you look at them and then you look at the more modern, or should we say the CEOs that have stood out for different reasons, you got your Willie Walsh, you got Al Backer with QR, you got Branson, you got Hogan, you got lots of others. How would you say the old school and the new school differed?
Well, the old school was certainly more traditional, more structured. And when I say old school, let me put it in three phases. Old school, pre-deregulation.
Yes.
Okay, the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
It was easier to run an airline because you just had to have good politicians and good lobbyists in Washington. And it didn't matter what your cost structure was, because you could always raise the fares because the government said you could raise the fares, and that was okay. And they supported the unions as well. So, and they controlled your routes. After deregulation, it was the Wild West. I mean, I lived through it because I was hired by AirCal that virtually the month of deregulation, because I knew the regulation environment. And we were coming out of California, and we could all of a sudden fly anywhere.
Yeah.
And they brought me in at first to run the stations, and then I went up from there. And I remember the first month, Braniff opened like 10 or 15 stations in a week. It was their demise, by the way. They had people lined up in Washington the day of deregulation. I think it was March of 78. All the lawyers were there, bam, going like crazy. They had construction people building counters. I was one of them. I flew up to Reno and said, we're coming into Reno. And the airport authority guy, the director, said, we don't have any space. I said, walk me around, we'll find space. And I built my own gate area out of plywood in 30 days. I hired a guy that did all the counters and backdrops for us out of LA, put him on an airplane. He didn't realize it was winter. He came up with a t-shirt. He said, I'm freezing myself. So, and we found a corner of Reno Airport, and we put up plywood. In 30 days, we were flying into Reno. Now, they were wild times, and it took a certain personality to be able to handle what was arguably chaos, by the way, because everybody wanted to be everywhere. Everybody wanted everybody else's gates. You couldn't find gates, ticket counter space, lots of politics. So we had to deal with all of that. So that was that phase. Then it's matured over the years. And of course, in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, there was the Lorenzo, Crandall, Bethune, those kind of folks, which were very accomplished people in their own right, very well thought of, and each one had a different style. Bob Crandall was really tough. When he hired me, I said, Bob, I'm not sure I want to come with America. He said, why? I said, well, Forbes has you as one of the meanest bosses in America. And he's looking at me over dinner, and he said, me? I'm not mean. I said, of course you're not. You're at the top of the pyramid. And he kind of got it. But Bob was tough. I mean, there was a story of one guy had a heart attack in the budget meeting. It's probably true. I ended up being okay in the budget meetings because I rehearsed and I had facts like Crandall would say, you've got a problem in misconnect bags in Paris. And I said, actually, I've got a solution. So I had a map, and I had a driver that I hired to do expedited baggage delivery between the Air France flight up from Nice connected to American's flight going to Dallas. And I actually had a diagram. I said, see, this is the guy, this is the route he takes. It was that kind of detail. And that's what you had to have, or you were out to lunch and you had to do it every quarter. He was tough, but he was different behind the scenes. In front of people, Bob was in control. I've seen him in meetings that he would just rant and rave against corporate officers. Corporate officers would kind of hide in the back because they didn't want to catch his eye. I mean, I caught his eye once, and he said, "What are you doing about it?" I said, "I'm working on it." He said, "Don't tell me what you're working about. Tell me what you're doing about it."
Yeah.
Big lesson, right?
Yeah, some like you said, board meetings and BRMs and everything. I can always remember watching a couple of people, and they were their hands were physically shaking, and they were sweating, waiting for their turn to have to say what they were doing or not doing or whatever. And
well, we probably had, tons of people that just did analytical work to be at the officer meeting on Monday mornings to answer any question that you wanted. And when I did my first budget review with Bob, I put a cartoon on the front page. Nobody ever did that. And I said, let's just kind of start with a little bit of humor, because humor fixes so many things in life. And then to finalize it to today's world, we went through the Glenn Tiltons at United, who was not an airline guy. And I was adversely affected personally because I think they should have bought Aloha. He made a mistake. I don't mind saying it. And then the board did. And my mistake was I should have gotten on an airplane, gone into the board meeting and told the board myself what I thought. So you learn, sort of. Yeah. But he was not an airline guy. Gordon Bethune, airline guy. Crandall came up marketing, but knew everything. And he was an airline guy. Doug Parker's a finance guy, but an airline guy. Been through a bunch of airlines. So the world's a little bit different today. And I just saw where JetBlue is now starting to fly to Europe, which is also going to be interesting. So the characters have changed, but also remember, Chris, society's changed. Education has changed.
Yeah.
When I started with TWA, they put me through school. I mean, for 2 years after I graduated and before my undergraduate or my MBA, TWA sent us to school and trained us in every aspect of the operation for 2 years. And they don't do that now. And I go into the cockpit every time just to say hello to the crew. I can't fly in there any longer. And invariably, it comes down to, what do you do, Dave? And I tell them a little bit about it. And that I started on the ramp. And every single one says, gosh, I wish our CEO started on the ramp. The CEOs today don't understand a lot of operations. And running an airline is like a quilt. It's incredibly complex. And if you don't understand all the different elements of the quilt, then you can't be as effective and optimize profitability. And I can also tell you that most cockpit guys, wonderful people, I mean, seriously, terrific guys, always rag against the CEOs. I mean, 100% of the time.
Yeah.
It's just sort of part of it, you just got to be ready for it.
That runs through the organization. Though everybody looks up and they complain, and sometimes you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But I do believe strongly that people have got to pay a little bit more attention now to detail. They've got to listen to facts more, and they've got to make sure that they verify that things are being done the way they want them to be done, and not the way it gets filtered between that middle management that looks after themselves and passes on what they want to pass on and holds back what they don't. So I think that the CEO or a modern CEO needs to know what's going on the ground and needs to make it clear that the people on the ground know that he knows what's happening on the ground. I think that's really important now, because far too many, they operate at 25,000 feet. They only want to read something if it's on one slide or one page, and it's ridiculous to be imposing things like that. Everybody's time is precious, but if things are necessary and they're critical, you need to spend the due amount of time to make sure you understand what the situation is and support the people accordingly.
Well, you have to have a skill set that includes listening. And let me tell you a couple of stories about what that means. I came from the ground up. And I think every single person is valuable, whether they have a big title, a little title, secretary to a senior VP. So they all have value, and you have to show people that value. Now, in an airline, every day, first thing in the morning, 8:30, everywhere in the world, there's an ops conference, and stations are on, maintenance is on, flight ops is on, in-flight's on. All these folks talk about, what happened yesterday and what's the plan for today, including airplane issues and so on.
Yeah.
People ask me how I was able to take Air Jamaica from 10% on time to 90% on time, worst in North America to the best. and how I did the same thing at Aloha. I said, it's really not very complicated. First of all, I know what questions to ask. And there was an Orange County manager that I said, why did you have that delay yesterday? He said, well, I don't know. I'll check. I said, what do you mean check? Weren't you there?
Yeah.
I didn't yell. I just asked. Now remember, there's 30 people listening.
Yeah.
Then so he got back to me. And then there was an in-flight delay. And everybody, at the gate, they said, well, it was maintenance. It was in-flight. Nobody wants to take responsibility, right? So,
yeah.
But I was a gate agent, so I knew the game. So this in-flight manager said, this was the reason for the delay, and it wasn't in-flight. I said, well, that's interesting. I said, I'm not sure you're correct. Why don't you go back and talk to a few people and let us know tomorrow what really happened. She came in the following day and she said, how did you know? I said, I know because I was there. Now, I didn't yell, but I knew the right questions to ask. And when people get asked those questions, they know what you're talking about. But more importantly, you don't hand them their head. You don't embarrass them in front of other people. There's ways to do it. And it's better to be subtle. And, I had a guy that was on the cell phone. I might have mentioned this to you before in one of our meetings at Aloha, the maintenance guy. And I said, can I see your business card? And let me show you mine. Can we not do that anymore? And everybody sort of got the message. And then the following staff meeting, everybody had my face. They put it on a sticker with my face. And everybody was me. It was hilarious. But that was camaraderie.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And you also mentioned in the book about, that you embraced adversity in every part of your life. And when you're faced with it, there were certain criteria or certain things that you always felt were important. And you listed 4 in this particular chapter. So the first one being composure, and you say, when you are calm and thoughtful, this instills confidence that you will lead the team to success, even if it means making uncomfortable or unpopular moves. So that's
and remember, Chris, when you're in crisis, which I was a lot, people watch you. Is he smiling? Is he sad? What's he doing? Does he know something we don't know? So you've always got to have that composure. My mind goes a mile a minute, but you might not know it. I mean, when you go through bomb threats and real bombs and evacuations and all that stuff, and everybody looks to you, you develop, based on experience, a level of calm. Not everybody, but the crazier it gets, the calmer I get. And it helps me think better. And people that get irrational and overreact aren't thinking. And then they send the wrong signal. And you're talking about life and death stuff. You're not talking about just it's serious, and you have to have that level of composure.
Yep. No, I agree with you. And then the second one you talk about is long-term thinking, where you say never deal in absolutes and never box yourself in to a no way out scenario. And also, understand each other's parameters, and hot buttons and disputes can usually be worked out, but have a longer term picture of what's going on rather than the immediate now.
Yeah, because the immediate now in crisis situations, you have to make certain firing line decisions. But when you're negotiating for airplane deals or you're negotiating with the unions, you have to think longer term in 2 aspects. The first one is relationships themselves, because you're not going to get a decent deal done unless you have a fair and honest relationship with the folks across the table and understand that. And I understand that. And you need to have that aspect. And then you also have to say, well, okay, there's going to be another negotiation and another negotiation. It's going to be another airplane deal, and there's going to be another Boeing deal. And how do we think longer term? And how do we want to position ourselves, our company, and our futures based upon the longer term thinking? Not everybody does that, but I think the most successful executives are those that have a vision.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And also the third point you put down was, no matter how bad things get, if you dig your heels in, the other side will dig their heels in, and it's going nowhere. So you have to have an approach that there's always going to be an answer, or there always could be an answer. And stay with a creative approach, and how you can bring both sides to the table and come to some sort of a solution, because there is normally an answer that can be found.
Well, there always is, no matter how dire the circumstances. At the end of the day, reasonable people reach reasonable accommodations, and sometimes they don't. But if you don't have the attitude that either this will pass or we will solve this, you become negative. One of the things I learned in the industry was if you got a bad day, the good news is tomorrow's probably going to be better, because it always is.
Yeah.
Some days are good, some days are bad. So you just have to be able to balance that and your own behavior in the midst of it, because I found in every single situation in my career, there was always an answer. We were not going to get Aloha finance without solving the pension plan, $250 million. And we didn't have the money, and we had to go to Washington with a PBGC to get them to reverse it. Now you're talking about climbing mountains here. This was one of those things that I thought we would never pull off, but we did, because I said, there's an answer here somewhere. We went to Washington. We met with our attorneys who wanted to put Aloha out of business, to prove to Delta and Northwest that if you screw with us on the pension plan, there's going to be consequences. So I said, well, then I'm going to keep moving up the ladder. I talked to politicians and senators and mayors and governors, and worked on the guy that made the final decision, Brad Bell, and got a meeting with him between Christmas and New Year's, because I was confident that there was an answer here. And at that meeting, he listened to us, left with his attorney, came back and said, I'll do what you've asked for. Just like that. Yeah. I was amazed, but we would never have gotten through that without me feeling confident that there is an answer here somewhere. And in my entire career, I've always found answers, whether it's a maintenance issue, a flight ops issue, a personnel issue, a union negotiation issue. There's always something. You might not have thought about it yet, or you might not have pushed the right button, but there's always an answer, and it keeps you going forward.
Yeah. And sometimes if you listen harder, the answer comes easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, the fourth one is negotiating in front of the cameras is a very bad idea. And my God, has that been the killer of so many? But also, you know, the way the press and the media, you know, the way they attack people and the way they surprise people, but especially now with all sorts of social media bouncing around, very, very, very dangerous. So, you know, to get good training and good support from the company that you're working for is crucial.
Well, I was fortunate. I've always been comfortable in that environment in front of the camera from just experiences. You know? And years ago, I was on a flight, and there was a famous TV personality on there. We were in the galley talking, and he's also a consultant. And he said, listen, Dave, the trick is, first of all, you're in control. You don't have to answer the reporter's question. Yeah. Just know what you want to say and figure it out that way. And I never forgot that. And then I was in heavy negotiations with the pilots union at Aloha. And I am in the coffee shop on a Saturday morning in Honolulu, Starbucks, and I open up the local paper, and one of the pilots is making comments in the newspaper about our negotiations. Ooh. And I flipped out. I called him on his cell phone, one of the very few times that I really get angry. The Starbucks manager said, excuse me, could you take that call outside? Because it was just egregious. And then I told the union, that is simply not the way to go. You need to keep some stuff behind you to be effective in negotiations. The other thing that I was fairly comfortable with was going on the record versus off the record. So at Aloha, I get there first day. We have no money. We're in trouble. This is, everybody's talking about it. So I told our PR lady, I said, here's the deal. No press interviews for 30 days, zero. Yeah. I got an action plan. I'm going to execute that. And in 30 days. And then I had on the record and off the record. There has never been a reporter or television guy ever that has violated that with me, ever. But you just come up front in the beginning and say, here's the deal. And then I brought a reporter that I thought was reasonable. And I brought him into the inner sanctum. And I said, sit down, I'm going to tell you what's going on. This is in the midst of all the drama at Aloha. I said, I'm going to tell you what's going on. This is off the record. I just want to give you perspective and balance. And then you come back to me and I go back on the record on some things I'm willing to say on the record. But what that did was two things. It got me favorable comments in the press, but more importantly, the reporters trusted me. And once years ago, General Lyon, very, very wealthy guy, had a car collection worth a ton of money. Like he had the original Bugatti, Hitler's car, Earl Flynn's car, and he had them all in this museum. And he wasn't a guy that liked to give interviews. But 60 Minutes, and I think it was Mike Wallace, convinced him. And General Lyon's opinion was, I will do the interview. Do not ask me about the value of the cars.
Right,
Don't do that.
Right.
That was the parameter, right? Chris Wallace gets on, as only he would, and starts talking about the value of the cars. And Lyon was so mad. So now he's the chairman and the owner of AirCal, and we're in the midst of a lot of public stuff. We're a big carrier in the West Coast. And Bill would refuse to do interviews. And I said, well, I'll do them, Bill, but let me give you a thought. They're going to write the story either way. Now, they're going to write the story with your input or without your input. And without your input, they're going to go to some third party that might not be on your wavelength and might say something. So control the message, because the message is going out either way. So try to manage the message either way you want to. So I've learned a lot of these lessons over the years.
Yeah, and some valuable ones as well. Now, if you look at all of the people that you worked with and either mentored or influenced or coached you, or you learned from your observations, and also the modern guys, if you were a Frankenstein and you had to put together a CEO monster, what would be the best of the best that you would say is necessary, especially now coming out of such a unique period as this pandemic and this crisis?
So would you say monster, a good monster or a bad monster?
No, when I say monster, it's just for the sake of the film. I'm talking, I'd say a beauty. Let's say a beauty, a CEO.
Okay.
Beauty,
okay.
A CEO hero.
All right. So here's a provocative thought, and I'll try to work my way through a very complex and tricky question.
Yeah.
Now we take the body, okay, because Frankenstein was built by parts, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what I think you're talking about. So there's parts of the body. So there's a mind.
Yep.
There's a heart.
Yep.
And there's a soul.
Yep.
There's a lot of CEOs that have a brilliant mind, are callous and have no heart, and so don't even have a soul. Find me the person that has the intellect and the brain power and the bandwidth to be able to deal with complex issues in the industry, a heart to be sensitive to the less fortunate and to people that are in a jam, and show that level of compassion, even if you're tough, and have a soul where you know, based on perhaps your upbringing or what is inside you, what's right and what's wrong. You combine those three parts of the body, that's your CEO. Now, I know guys that had 1, 2, or 3, the brain, the heart, the soul. Some had none, and there's a few of those, because let's face it, it happens in life. But yeah, just thinking that through, the guys, Crandall was one of the really, really smart guys. Herb had compassion and heart. I'm still looking for the guy with the soul, I think. I need some more thinking through that process, but I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah, the soul and a sense of humor, and just being a people's person is a great thing, but it's also sometimes very difficult, because sometimes you can be too good and you can be too close, and people throw that back at you as well.
Well, let me give you an example of humor, because I believe humor has a place in so much in life. So I'm supposed to open up Berlin for American Airlines, and they thrust, because I was VP International, but the presentation was done by somebody else. And the day before, they said, oh, you're going to do the presentation at the officers meeting. This is 30 corporate officers, Crandall in the middle, in a private room in a hotel. We had microphones. It was that big. And the screen's there. So I'm up at the podium, and I start the presentation, and the first slide. And there's a voice at the back. It's Crandall, who says, I can't see the words. And I looked up at the screen and said, well, Bob, I can see the words. It's just, you had to be there. But it broke the ice, because he would fire people after those meetings if something went wrong. And a little bit of the humor helped me through so much. Find that little something that brings a smile to people, or breaks the ice, or changes the conversation. Yeah. And you can get further in your agenda if you take that attitude. And there's always a joke out there somewhere. I mean, there's always a light side of things. General Lyon was very, very accomplished and smart and very wealthy, and you would never know it. And he had a sense of humor that would shock you. He would come out with these one-liners, like Rodney Dangerfield, who would come up with these one-liners, like, are you married? No. Well, take mine. I mean, he had all these terrific one-liners. Well, that was Bill. So I learned a lot over the years from a lot of really talented, capable people.
Yeah.
You got to learn. You have to learn from your experiences, your mistakes, and never believe your press clippings, because that'll screw you up, but learn from your mistakes.
That's it.
And then you grow as a person.
That's it. Yeah. No, learning is always good. Laughing is fantastic. And also respect. And in the book as well, in this particular chapter, you talk about respecting everybody, whether they're white collar, blue collar, or no collar. And that's so important. And something that I've always said to people is, I've traveled so much, and to some great places and some terrible places. But in both places, you have to go to the toilet. And whenever I go to a toilet, especially in an airport or somewhere like that, and I see somebody who goes out of their way, the cleaner, to look after that toilet and make it as good as they possibly can with a smile on their face in that sort of environment, they're the person I always give a big tip to, talk to, and thank. Because if they can do that in that environment, my God, why can't people do it when they're in so much better places?
Well, that's an interesting analogy. I might have come up with a different one, but I get the point. You're right at every level. I saw that actually yesterday. I was flying back from Oakland, and there was a guy cleaning out the men's room, and I had actually the same thought. So when you talk about, and this whole political issue about immigration and stuff, there's a role for a lot of people in our society.
Yep.
And there's, from the Egyptian days, there's patricians and plebeians, and there was all different dynamics. And that's the culture in the world. It's the human condition, as I've mentioned. And all types fit in. And that was a very good point, Chris, because my dad taught me that years ago when I mentioned in the book that I was asked, instead of being upstairs as a manager of the ticket counter and gates, and I met the whole Hollywood crowd and everybody coats and ties and the club and all that. And then they wanted to move me downstairs to run the ramp, 1,000 union people, some rough and tumble, to load bags, clean airplanes, and that sort of thing. And I called my dad and I said, I don't know, I don't know if I can do this. And he said, and he had 10,000 people working for him at the Bud Company. He was very accomplished. He'd always walk down the floor and talk to the folks, knew a lot of their names, and which I did. I'd learned that from him. And I'd always walk around the bag room. I'd walk on the airplanes. I loved it as well, but it was the right way to manage. So I went downstairs and I put my office next to the time clock, so that when the ramp folks came in and out, they punched in and out with my door open, and I'm sitting there. I put a sofa in there, and it was amazing. And to this day, if you were to ask me which one was the better job, being upstairs high profile or being downstairs, with the worker bees loading airplanes, I don't know what my answer would be. I loved them both. They were just different. But look, if you can manage people, it doesn't matter what kind of shirt they have or what their education is or what their background or their pedigree. At the end of the day, we're all pretty much human.
Yeah. No, you're right. They're different worlds, and you can like them and dislike them and feel rewarded in different ways. But the one thing when you're on the ground is you really appreciate and respect what people have to do day in and day out. And life is, it doesn't matter how old we are, it's not long enough, and time is such a valuable commodity. So if you're able to work in an environment that can influence other people whilst they're working in your organization or for you, so that they have a bit of fun, they enjoy what they're doing, they're engaged, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to achieve, because it's helping people appreciate and enjoy that most valuable of asset that just drains away with time, which is time itself. So it's I think anybody who's able to do that and put a good spirit into an organization and create a nice culture and a good working environment, that's what's going to keep people in the future more than ever before. It's not going to be money. It's going to be, what you do with your time and how well you enjoy it. And you keep talking about Herb Kelleher, and Southwest is always best known. but what he did, or his philosophy of, simplicity, tenacity, positivity, and love, as it was known, they were the original startup, keeping frills out of the business and to a minimum, and only flying where it was making sense and where it was making money. And as a result, if you're able to build success on success, it normally breeds a nice working environment. And that's where I don't understand why people don't spend more time encouraging and training and developing people, so that they get more of a reward and they understand the reason why they're doing something, instead of just being told what to do. And then you get more ownership, more accountability. And I think that then breeds and it grows itself. It's something that you don't have to water, you don't have to feed, it does it itself. And I think that's so important.
Well, that's true. And there's so many stories and experiences in my life that support that. And I mentioned various items in the book, who you promoted, the first female on the ramp as a supervisor. I did. To take the toughest guy on the ramp and make him a supervisor because he had leadership skills.
Yeah.
I've cleaned out any new company that I went into. I would always look at the people at the top and say, well, where did he come from? And sometimes you're going to find out it was politics. And that's why I always give a speech the first day and the first week with the owners, that I've got to be in charge. And if there's any friendships, you better let me know now, because
Exactly.
there's only one guy climbing up the mountain at the point, and it's got to be me. And it's not ego, it's not arrogance, it's just a certain style of leadership. And otherwise you're going to fail. But it's almost like in a marriage and in life and in dealing with people, if you come up front in a reasonable way, as opposed to harboring resentment or keeping it inside you, you're not as effective as a leader, because people know your title. You don't have to remind them about your title, right? But you have to earn your title. It's not on a business card. It's how you project yourself and how you make decisions and how you listen to other people when you make those decisions.
100%. And if you get into too much politics, you got to remember too much, because it's just so complex, and it's a minefield. It's always better to keep a clear head and move forward. Now, with that clarity, and also now with modern day pressures, because in the old days, and like you said, before or pre-deregulation, and if you look at that, you had a dogmatic leadership style, whereas now you've got different levels of inclusiveness, you've got diversity, you've got difference of opinions, you've got you have to listen first, talk later. And then you've got effective communication. You've got to be a totally different animal now. And, there's so many pressures now from society, social issues, mental issues, stresses. It's a totally different playing field now. And
between societal changes, social media, education, today's world, politics, whether you like it or not, you have to adjust. And it's certainly a lot more inclusive, as it should be. I hope we don't take that too far in terms of not making the right decisions, because everybody should be included, but on the basis of their skill and their accomplishments and their desire to work hard.
David, that's exactly where I was coming from, because
that's what it takes.
This swing or this change has got a potential negative impact of swinging too far, so that people are frightened to say what they feel, what they think, and it's just wrong. And I agree with you. Hopefully it will then start to come back, and there'll be a balance, and it will be based on people's qualities, capabilities, and people being people, no matter what background, what area, what color, what religion, doesn't matter. That should be the basis for why people do it, not quotas, not percentages, and not for PR and to be politically correct, but because it's the right thing to do. And,
let me give you an example, a story. There's two guys at the bar.
Yeah.
They're having a drink on a Friday night. And one guy's father is an executive vice president with a company, management, let's just say. And the other one is the son of a labor leader. And they're having a drink. And the labor guy takes a modest shot at management. Now they're in the middle here. Okay, this is the fulcrum. So they're right here, right?
Yeah.
And then And the guy takes it personally because it's against his father, who's an executive. So the pendulum goes a little bit this way.
Yeah.
So then the son of the executive says something more robust against unions. Pendulum goes this way, it goes this way.
Yeah.
And then the labor guy wants to bring that pendulum back to his side. So he makes some kind of nasty comment. And now we're over here.
Yeah.
The trick is to be in the middle.
Yeah.
And let me give you an example that I mentioned. I'm in Marbella 2 years ago. We're having dinner. And I can pick out a pilot in front of 200 people at dinner. I don't know how. It's just, whatever. So we're sitting there across from my wife, really nice Spanish restaurant. And there's a couple next to us. And my wife was in a gregarious mood. I generally kind of keep to myself. But in any case, she started chatting with this couple. They're like in their mid-30s. And I said, so what do you do? And he was a little reluctant at first. He said, well, I'm a pilot with Airline. So I said, that's great. We fly them all the time. We came down here on them. And so I said, I'm an airline guy. I've had some experiences. And so tell me what's going on. And he said, well, we're in negotiations against management.
Yeah.
I said,
Wrong thing to say. Yeah.
I said, what did you say? No, we're in negotiations right now against management. I said, well, you can't do that. You have to be in negotiations with management. And you should have seen his face because and he looks at me and he said, I think I just went to school.
Yeah.
And then he sends me a nice email a couple of days later and he said, you changed my thinking. He said, you're absolutely right. I said, it's not we, them. If it's we, them, you're never going to get anything done. Like Democrats and Republicans today, right? You're never going to get this stuff done when it's all we, them. It's just atrocious. It's a terrible example for our youth to watch, what's going on today, the lack of compromise and listening and that sort of thing. It's all power and politics and ego and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I never forgot the look on his face. It's like, you're right. I said, well, you might want to take that back to your Alpha buddies at the table.
But isn't that a shame that that's the attitude that's almost passed from generation or position to position, that you're not doing well if you're not against them or if you're not fighting them or whatever. It's so wrong, because if there's a different approach to it and people are working together for the right reasons and representation and outcome, much more successful.
Yeah, I agree. I've met a lot of interesting characters in my life at every phase and personality and educational level. And the best, I think, back to the CEO issue, the best is somebody that's had multiple jobs in the industry. My objective when I got into the industry was twofold. I wanted to get out of my hometown, okay? And I wanted to go see the world. And obviously I did. And the second was, and it actually happened, I said, I may not be the smartest guy in a room or a boardroom or a meeting with this person or that person, but I will try to be the most knowledgeable. So how do you get there?
Yeah.
You do every job. So I did all the ground stuff. I did airport management. I did air freight. I did reservations. I did dining. I ran a dining unit. I did sales. And then when I moved up, I was a marketing guy. I was a station guy. I was an ops guy. I negotiated airplane acquisitions. I did an IPO. I did I did pricing, scheduling, all of these different disciplines. So if you don't have that, getting back to the quilt, you can't as easily put it together because it is so complex behind the curtain. I achieved two objectives. My first was to see the world. And the second was to know the industry at least as well as anybody else could possibly know it. So when I'm in a meeting, when we're talking about complex issues, it could be flight ops, it could be maintenance, whatever it is, I could have dialogue with the head of maintenance, and then I could leave and have dialogue with the head of marketing. And challenge them and question them. And it's all based on experience. So if I was to say, here's what we should do in the future for the industry, maybe we should go back to educating folks from the bottom up more. The problem, of course, is the world's different. We started with 10 people at TWA. and they interviewed thousands out of college around the country at all universities, and they chose 10.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate to be one of the 10. Then they sent us to New York to be with a shrink for 2 days to see whatever. I actually don't think I ever saw a copy of that report, but in any case, I was assigned O'Hare. Now, I think over the first 10 years, the turnover was probably 80%. I mean, certainly they didn't stay with TWA.
Yep.
I mean, I think there was one person that lasted longer than me, and I was there 12 years. So on the one hand, TWA benefited certainly in the short term, but their long-term objective of having senior management that well educated and versed in the details of the business did not happen. But on the positive side, looking at the industry, forget individual airlines for a moment, from an industry perspective, if you have leaders that have more in-depth experience in all the different phases of operation, the industry benefits. And I'm not just a specific airline person.
Yeah, it's an industry. That's right.
I'm an industry person. I believe in the industry. I believe in unions. I believe in those guys in the cockpit and in the cabin and downloading bags. And I'm sensitive to them. My first day at Aloha, where did I go? I went down on the ramp. I went into the bag room my first day. And they didn't know who I was. I walked around the bag room while they were putting bags in the carts and introduced myself. And that sent a message. I was up at the gate with 2 weeks later, I was talking to a gate agent. I said, so forget the numbers for a minute, because I'm seeing the numbers about city pairs and the performance. We were finding, I think, Fiji and some of these Solomon Islands and other places. I said, it's kind of odd. Why are we flying there? So I asked the gate agent. I had all the numbers, but I asked the gate agent, I said, what do you think about us flying here? He said, well, I don't know, we're only putting 10 or 20 people on. So I went back to I guess he was the vice president at the time of scheduling and planning. Pretty important job, by the way. And I said, I get a question. Why are we flying here? And he said, well, actually, we're bringing people from Burbank to Honolulu to go to, I think it was Marshall Islands or one of those places in the middle of the Pacific. And I said, well, that's odd. How many people? He said, well, there's a couple of people. I said, no, the airplane holds 150 people. So work me through this. So here's what I did. I said, it was like early in the week. I said, I'll give you to Friday. Go back, do a white paper, simple stuff, nothing fancy.
Yeah.
Explain to me the pros and cons and why we should continue to fly that route.
Yep.
Well, the answer was not very good, and I closed the route the following Monday. Gate agent gave me part of that because that was real time. There was a part that was academic, a ton of numbers that said how many people every day and the yield and the profitability, because we did segment profitability analysis all the time. And I really believed in that. And so we got rid of it. And then I got rid of him actually about 2 weeks later and brought in one of the old timers in my life, Bruce Wetzel, that really knew how to schedule an airline. I mean, that was his deal. And he did it at American. He was the only other guy besides me that ended up at American. All the other officers were paid off their contracts and off they went.
Yeah, no, some people who are specialists like that are worth the weight in gold, aren't they?
Yeah, and we were simpatico. You know, we thought a lot alike. One of the other interesting stories, when Ronald Reagan shut down the air traffic controllers, people said, what? And Reagan was that kind of guy. He said, hey, wait a minute. You're not going to tell me what to do. They thought, there's no way you could do this. Well, of course, he brought it in the military and he did it. But what happened, as is so much in the industry, people were selling air. Yeah. So all of a sudden, these brokers jumped in the middle between carrier A and carrier B, and they got slots from carrier A and they put them in their portfolio and they sold them to carrier B. This actually happened.
Yeah.
And it was the early 80s. And Bruce was in the middle of that because Bruce was the guy protecting our slots. And, you know, they reduced the frequencies because the air traffic controllers were on strike.
Yeah.
So the military came in and they had to reorganize air traffic and slots and frequencies and so on. Bruce was in the middle of that and did a terrific job. And I also remember back then we were flying charters for travel agents, including people out of Salt Lake City.
Yep.
And June Mars had a travel agency. The president was Dave Nealman, and I'll get back to that in a second. So June Mars was flying these charters. We flew the airplane. They sold the charters. Delta goes to the feds and says they don't have a right. They're not a scheduled carrier, but they're posting it as if they have a scheduled carrier. So what did June Mars do? She became an airline. So she filed the papers and she became an airline. And she had about 20 or 30 planes running around, no, maybe 10 or 15, running around the West Coast. And her president was Dave Nealman. She's getting ready to do an IPO for a couple $100 million. Kelleher finds out, gets on an airplane. This is so Kelleher, gets on an airplane, zips over to Salt Lake City, found out that June Mars had stage 4 cancer.
Ooh.
Sits down with June Mars and says, I'm aware of your issues. I'm here to help. Her didn't want him to do an IPO. That would be serious competition. He walked in and gave her a check for a couple $100 million. In addition, Dave Nealman had a contract. So he got some money, a fair amount of money. He wanted to use that to start another airline, but he had a non-compete. So Southwest now owns Mars Air.
Yeah.
Merges it in, right? Dave Nealman goes to Southwest, working with the Southwest folks. Now, the cultural differences between Dave Nealman and the Southwest culture is night and day. Talk about cultural issues. Everybody knew it. Everybody recognized it. Dave's been a very accomplished guy, and I'll mention that in a second. But it was a different culture. But he had a non-compete. So after about 6 months, they reached sort of an accommodation that this wasn't going to work. So what does Dave Nealman do? He goes up and starts WestJet in Canada.
Right.
Because Canada wasn't part of the deal.
Yep, exactly. Okay.
So he started a technology company where res agents could work from home and take calls.
Yep.
And he started WestJet. And 5 years to the day, he goes into Washington and files to start JetBlue. And he ran JetBlue, made a lot of money, made a couple of mistakes there with a snowstorm in New York. And then he went on Dave Nealman. You talk about TV.
Yeah, yeah.
He was not ready for primetime TV with the snowstorm. And Dave Nealman, the commentator at the time on the night show, ripped him apart. I mean, Letterman, Dave Letterman.
Yeah, Dave. Yeah.
And so the board said, I think we better bring in an ops guy because Dave was a dreamer, very successful. Dave has started like 3 airlines. He just started another one this week. Back in the US. It's called Breeze, I think, to go secondary airport to secondary airport.
Yeah.
And at one point in a negotiation, he was trying to figure out who to invest in. Now he put in $25 million for JetBlue, so he was able to easily get investors. I was trying to start an airline. So every time I go to a potential investor or JV or somebody, oh, Dave was there the week before. We were like following each other around. And Branson was going to be involved. So he's arguing with Branson about the configuration of the airplanes. And you know, Branson likes the first class and coach and all coach and seat pitch and all. So anyhow, that never happened. Branson never got involved. And when you mentioned leadership, now Branson's also a dreamer and really, really good at it, but he's not an ops guy.
Yeah.
He's never been an ops guy. So he's always brought in people with a strong operating background because he knew, I think, I've met him a couple of times, chatted with him a few times, stayed at Michelle's Hotel in Jamaica. I've met him at a couple of functions. He's really quite an easy fellow to talk to, but very quiet, very much to himself. But I think he recognized intrinsically that different people have different skill sets. So just put in the right person.
Quality people in the right position and let them get on with it.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's the right attitude. Now, Dave, listen, we're coming to the end of the session today, and something I just want to finish on, and it's quite a nice little ending that you've got on this particular chapter, is you've put nothing beats a positive attitude and surrounding oneself with those in control of their emotions. I choose to wake up happy every day. Yes, it is a choice, and I refuse to surround myself with negative people.
And I won't. I absolutely won't, personal or professional. Just won't do it.
But I
Life's
like
too
this
short.
bit. I like this bit afterwards. It says, while others may try to influence your attitude, it is important to remember that only you control your feelings and emotions, nobody else. Never, ever give someone else power or control over your feelings.
And I say that for experiences. And let me give you a quick example. I'm with American. Bob Baker is the executive VP, chief operating officer. Wonderful guy, died way too soon. And the Ops Center American is named after him. We were good friends. And I was running international. I went into him and I said, Bob, I've got this problem in London. And he looked at me like, okay, I need your help. He said, why are you asking me? It's not my monkey.
Yeah, you
He
do.
said, see, I'm not taking your monkey, Dave. Monkey, they were his words, monkey. I'm putting that monkey. And by the way, there's a story out about this monkey thing, but he said, you take your monkey back. I don't want your monkey. I've used that in personal life. I've advised friends about it. And when people get upset, like in a personal relationship or with their in-laws or
Yeah.
boss,
Don't bring it work. Don't bring it into
I said, let me tell you what you just did. You gave your mother-in-law power over you. Why would you do that? Because you see, she wins.
Yep.
Why? Because you're the only one in control. When you wake up every day, you're the only one that can control your emotions. Same when you go to bed. Yep. And in the meantime, if you harbor grudges, if you're angry with somebody, you can express it. But if you harbor it, they win, not you.
Yeah. And you're putting their rocks in your rucksack and carrying too much weight.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure again, my friends. And so in 2 weeks' time, we will be starting Chapter 11, Expanding Horizons. And that takes us well over halfway through the book, Dave.
Wow. Time flies, huh?
Halfway through. Well over. So, then we're, seriously, we're well over. So I'm looking
Well, I love telling stories because, it's one thing to just write a book or talk about issues, but when you can throw in stories and real life situations and real life people, it's an industry that is ripe for everything from personalities to romance to intrigue to danger to frontline stuff. It just is, and maybe that's what attracted me to it. So I appreciate this opportunity to tell some stories and educate people in life behind the curtain.
No, it's lovely, and it's always nice. Like, stories are always what keeps people together, and it's great to look back. It's great to look forward, and it's lovely to reflect on the experiences you've had, and you've had more than most. I enjoy it, Dave, and I look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks' time. So take care of yourself. And
thank you. You too.
We'll see you again. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks.
All the best.